On the show today, we'll discuss the launch of the African Leaders for Nutrition initiative, and then we'll find out how Africa can harness its human capital for growth. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag #BeyondMarket. You can also follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Wadda. Now, as malnutrition continues undermining Africa's economic progress, heads of state, the African Union Commission and the African Development Bank are proposing to set up the African Leaders for Nutrition initiative. Oley Dibba-Wadda, Director of Human Capital, Youth and Skills Development at the AfDB, joins me now to discuss the launch of the African Leaders for Nutrition initiative. Thank you, Oley, for taking the time out to join us today.
Thank you very much, Esther. The pleasure is mine.
Now, help us understand the African Leaders for Nutrition initiative and what it seeks to achieve.
The African Leaders for Nutrition was set up by the President of the African Development Bank, President Awoniyi Adeshina, together with former President of Ghana, John Kafo. And the idea was to really look at the issues of malnutrition, stunting, and really addressing the issues of brain matter infrastructure, which affects the brains, particularly within the first 1,000 days of a childhood, from conception up to 2 years old. So the initiative was to really look at how we address malnutrition and how we avoid the issues of stunting, because it is an irreversible challenge that once you are malnourished and you have stunting, it's something that you cannot go back to. So the president is very passionate about this initiative, and it's the first time in the history of the African Development Bank that we have had such an initiative that really puts nutrition at the heart of what we do to support the continent.
Now, before this initiative was proposed in 2014, 4 years ago, the AU adopted the Declaration of Nutrition Security for Inclusive Economic Growth and Sustainable Development. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's 4 years later. Has there been any progress made, and is it to consolidate or to complement this new initiative?
It is to complement the initiative. So the initiative, the African Union is obviously has its own agenda that looks at nutrition wide, particularly within the continent. And the African Development Bank is also complementing what the African Union's vision is on nutrition. So what we are doing is we're trying to bring all the key stakeholders, the African leaders together to really champion and really put nutrition at the agenda. So rather than competing, we are complementing and bringing all the stakeholders, particularly the leaders, to really get them, educate them to be aware of the importance of malnutrition in the continent.
Now, it's been said that the progress in addressing malnutrition in Africa has been quite slow, and this is despite the increasing level of commitment and leadership that we're seeing across the continent. So tell us, what are the challenges that you see or that remain, those bottlenecks that you continue to see across the board on the continent?
I think the key challenge is education. Education. It's about creating an awareness and really showcasing what's malnutrition or undernutrition, the damages that it causes. So people talk about it, we hear about it, but I don't think people really appreciate the irreparable damage that this causes. So the challenge that we are faced now with is to ensure that countries, member countries and political leaders, particularly heads of state, ministers of finance, really understand the implications this has. Malnutrition and leads to stunting, and the reaction we get from stunting means that the mind and the brain doesn't develop, and when we do that, it affects the human development of the continent that we have. So in order to make sure that we have well-functioning economic growth, well-functioning human capacity and development, we need to make sure that we address the issues of malnutrition. The diets that we have in the continent are very starch-based, carbohydrate-based, which is okay, but I think it's important that we look at how we balance the various nutrients to ensure that the mother, the expectant mother, the lactating mother, the young child has a balanced diet of well-nourished food to be able to develop and grow to become a healthy individual.
Now, key point you raised there, education, but for those who work on the ground, NGOs, especially the Red Cross. I mean, they give stories about some of the bottlenecks. Some of them say belief systems, but a crucial factor that they name is poverty. So I'm thinking, even with awareness, but what about the issue of poverty? To what extent would you say that poverty is also a major challenge?
Well, I mean, I feel that in the African continent, I don't think poverty should be an excuse. We are all, a majority of the Africans are farmers. So we grow, we have organic food, but we use them, sometimes we use part of it for consumption, the others we use to sell them. So I think what is important is to educate the poor people on the importance of having a balanced diet. You can have mangoes. I mean, kids eat mangoes. We grow rice. We have cassava. So what is important is to educate them to be able to ensure that they have a balanced diet, that it doesn't just focus on one area or one particular nutrient, but to really spread it across. I don't think it's poverty per se. I think it's an awareness of how do we balance what we have, because a lot of what we have, most of it is free. It's grown, homegrown. We are rich. We have rich soils, and it's homegrown. So I think what we need to do is to educate and create that awareness, and to also get the governments to ensure that they put in place policies that support really understanding the dynamics of nutrition and having nutritious food. Another area that I think our governments need to look at is ensuring that there are policies, particularly within the markets, on what is being sold for consumption. I think that is very, very fundamental, because we keep eating what we don't understand, what we don't know how it is manufactured, and I think it's important that we really look at all of those holistically.
Now, I know that this African Leaders for Nutrition initiative is not a silver bullet, and I'm happy that you've mentioned the one key factor that's been either missing or we haven't seen enough of, which is education, and at the heart of it, awareness. So in what way directly, and I suppose that's going to be the #1 agenda and way to go, but in what way will this initiative hit the ground running, in the sense that tackling this problem head on? What are the specific steps that will be taken now that this problem has been identified, that awareness and education is the huge problem here? So what specific steps will this initiative take to tackle this problem head on?
Yeah, the first step is actually launching it, and the launch would be held on Monday, the 29th of January, at the African Union headquarters on the margins of the summit. And what we will do is to really, again, bring to the fore the issues of malnutrition, the issues of nutrition, so that heads of states and political leaders really get to understand and appreciate. We need to keep talking. I mean, it's like you said, it's not a silver bullet, but we need to keep talking. And what we need to do now is to engage those who make the final decisions, those who make the decisions on how much budget is allocated on nutrition, and those who make decisions on the policy frameworks in countries on what we eat, what is being sold to us, and what we produce. So that's the first step that this initiative will do. So we identified the African Development Bank has worked with key partners, with the Dangote Foundation, Big Win Philanthropists. We have the Gates Foundation. They are all key partners that are supporting the African Development Bank as a premier Pan-African institution to ensure that we work with governments to support. So we've identified champions as heads of state, very high-level leaders who will really help to ensure that we push this agenda across the continent and get others to buy in on this.
Now, I imagine that some African countries are more affected than the others. We have smaller African countries on the continent, and when it comes to the size of the economy, it's small, poverty is rife. And you mentioned the issue of funding. On the other hand, you do say that poverty should not be an excuse. But in a country where, or in a situation where, funding is a major constraint, and we have people living, most people living in rural areas, and poverty is just rife. How do you penetrate or make a difference in that kind of scenario?
Well, when there is, I think the first start will be political will. Political will to make sure that we put nutrition at the heart of what we do. And the second part is also educating the policymakers. It starts going down to different levels. So from the heads of state to the ministries, to the actors, to the civil society organization, sensitization. So those are the key steps that we will take. But at our level here, what we felt was fundamental was to bring together the leaders first, because that's where the buck stops. They are the ones that can make or break this initiative, and to get them to really engage and to commit to it. Unfortunately, 90% of them are all converted and are committed, but I think it's a way of really supporting them. What we are doing in the bank now is to really look at capacity building of nutrition across the entire bank. So all the sectors that we have in the African Development Bank will ensure that we are mainstreaming nutrition. So when we are building initiatives on water and sanitation, on agriculture, on gender issues, on education, we make sure that nutrition is mainstreamed across all the different areas. So that's one key start that we're doing. The African Development Bank has also set up the African Leaders for Nutrition Secretariat that is being funded and supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the Secretariat is now on course, and we hope that with this team that we have, we will be able to work and looking at banking on nutrition, where we are mainstreaming nutrition across the bank, and then looking at how we support the champions to build capacity to ensure nutrition at the country level. So we're looking at it in two folds.
Now, Oley, while this is quite laudable, and I mean, it's a fantastic idea and a step definitely in the right direction, some might argue that this will not be the first time that African leaders will be told or pressed to make nutrition, tackle the issue of malnutrition, create better awareness and education, especially at the grassroots levels, those living in the rural areas. This is not the first time, they've been asked to pay more attention and give this a priority. So I'm thinking, with all the steps that you've mentioned, this new initiative, what gives you the confidence that things will be different this time, that African leaders will listen this time, and those who are most affected will sum up the political will to do it?
There is, the African Development Bank is not the only one doing. So there's a movement out there. There is the Sun Global Movement on nutrition. There's so many key actors that the bank is also engaging with. I think what we are trying to do is to really operate as a mass movement, and each different stakeholders doing different forms. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to change. But like I said, if we insist and we persist and we keep doing what we do, I think change will happen. It is happening. There's been a lot of progress made. There's been a lot of awareness created. There are countries where heads of state are really taking it upon themselves to push. But the continent is not a country. There are 54 countries in the African continent. So it's a lot of hard work. But I think if we have champions like Kofi Annan, like President Kofo, President Adesina, really pushing and engaging with heads of state. And if we work also with movements like the Sun Global Movement, and we work with civil society organizations, I think we'll be able to spread out how we can really advocate to ensure nutrition becomes the heart of what we do and how we think. And I think as you grow older, all of us, including myself, we are all watching what we eat now. And even if you refuse, your body would actually react to it. So in essence, what we're trying to do is to really look at how we can really support schools, systems, school feeding programs and initiatives. Like I said, it's not magic bullet, it's not easy, but I think the fact that we have champions who are committed to really push this agenda is encouraging for us, and we are excited about that.
Okay, Oley, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back to continue from where we left off. I've been speaking to Oley Dibba-Wadda, Director of Human Capital, Youth and Skills Development at the African Development Bank. Oley Dibba-Wadda, Director of Human Capital, still with me to discuss how Africa can harness its human capital for growth. Oley, thank you so much for your time so far.
Thank you, Esther.
Now, a lot has been said about Africa's huge population, especially its youth population, a good number of whom are quite or still unemployed at this time. And there's been a lot of talk about how Africa should begin to invest in a strategic way in its human capital for a higher economic growth. Now, you've been, of course, made the Director of Human Capital, Youth, Skills and Development at the AfDB. But share your thoughts on how Africa so far has been investing in its human capital.
Thank you very much, Esther. I think this is the biggest challenge that we have across the entire continent. The demographic dividend of the continent is a challenge that we're experiencing on several fronts. On the one hand, there's the issue of migration. A lot of our youths are moving trying to get to Europe to seek greener pastures. On the other hand, we are losing our youths to join into fundamentalist groups. On the other hand, we also have our youths unemployed and not able to find work. So there's a mixed bag of several challenges that our countries face, and these are the future leaders. What is important is that we recognize and engage with them. I think one of the key challenges that we have realized is that we have been talking to the policymakers and not engaging as much with the youth. They have, they really have, they know what they want, they know where they want to go, they have agency, and I think it's important that we continue to engage and have dialogue with them to ascertain. We cannot address all their challenges, but I think what we need to do is to create enabling environments for them to be able to be employed and to also be self-employed. Those are some of the challenges that we face because a lot of them are leaving the continent to look for work. And when they are in other countries out in Europe, they work. So what we should do is create this environment. And this is what the bank is trying to really to harness. One of the flagship initiatives of the African Development Bank is the Jobs for Youth initiative, which was set up by the president of the African Development Bank. And we're trying to look at different areas of how we address youth unemployment issues, looking at integration, innovation, and investment. We have different initiatives that we have looking at small, medium enterprises, how we set them up within the agriculture sector, within the industrialization sector, and within the ICT sector. So these are some initiatives that we have that we are really looking at engaging with the youths. And we break them down into different countries depending on the country needs and priorities.
You know, I've often heard some analysts, job analysts, talk about the question that's been asked on the continent now, as far as the youth are concerned. Do they find a job or do they create one for themselves? And by that, I mean become entrepreneurs. But what is your response to that? What do you say when you hear that?
I think what is important is that we help them to be able to be self-employed and self-sustained. When we were going to school, we were being taught how to go to school to get jobs that are in offices, hold briefcases, and sit behind desks. That is no longer relevant in the context that we work in. So I think it's important that we link education, what we are being taught in school, and preparing our youths to be able to be self-sustained, to be able to be self-employed, and to be able to be independent in what they do and what they think. We have to appreciate that not everybody is cut out for the classrooms. And a lot of people that are in the enterprises, some of them are uneducated, some are semi-educated, and they are the majority of the ones that we engage with. So I think it's important that we really focus on harnessing this youth dividend that we have.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on the issue of skills acquisition on the one hand and education on the other hand. For education, taking a second look at the curricula at our higher institutions and the need for a drastic change to align with our present-day realities, and of course skills acquisition perhaps from the technical side of things. What are your thoughts?
I think, Esther, it's important that we start looking at skills for employability. The education system that we have in most of our schools across the continent are not serving the purposes for employment. We have graduates who are not able to find employment, and I agree this is not just within the African continent, but it's a global issue. But I think we need to start looking at key areas that we know that within the continent we are strong at, we know we can do, that we support our youth towards those directions where they can identify skills that creates employment for themselves, for their own sustainability. In this area, I give an example of looking at TVET, technical and vocational education and training. It's important that we start creating hubs and centers of excellence that promotes TVET, where we can support youths to have skills that would help them to be able to be self-sustaining, to be employed, and to also create employment for themselves, and to be able to to work and for the economic development of the continent.
But would you say that there's a strong drive or strong movement, as it were, to get African governments to begin to move faster along that path? Because yes, I imagine that many of them know the benefits, the usefulness of changing things, especially around skills acquisition. But would you say that we're already on the right path and are moving at a good pace?
I think we are. I fundamentally think that we are. The reason why I say that is because we are aware of the situation. Dialogue is happening. The youth are impatient. I think a lot of them are actually taking their own fate and their own future into their own hands. We look at the Jasmine revolution in North Africa, what has happened, what has triggered that. So I think that has triggered a lot of discussions and dialogue at policy level with decision makers to ensure that we address this demographic dividend of the youth that we have in the continent. I think things are happening at a very slow pace. What is important is that we engage with the youth to identify what their needs are, how do they want it, and we support them. Our role is to take a back seat and to guide and nurture and cultivate the future leaders that we have. In different areas, from entrepreneurship, political leadership, and different sectors. I think that's fundamental for us.
Let's talk about the issue of the girl child, education for the girl child on the continent. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the progress we've made so far, and perhaps if this is also part of the work that you're doing too?
Well, the girl child education is something that is very close to my heart, because that has been what I have been working on over the past years in my previous lives. It is, you cannot, as Madam Zuma had always said, the women and girls, they hold half the sky and gave birth to the other half. So you cannot talk about education, you cannot talk about development without engaging women and girls. It is fundamental. And I come from a fourth generation of educated women, and I have seen the impact that it has had on my own children. So you can imagine those that are first generation or second generation, where the mother is uneducated and the child is the first that is going to school, and the impact that has. So I think there's no question. We are fortunate now that even in the remotest of areas now, parents, fathers, mothers, grandparents have realized the importance of girls' education and sending their daughters to school. And some of them are actually realizing the benefits of it. So I don't think there is a need to really do a lot of convincing. What is important is that we continue to push for this agenda so it doesn't fall through the cracks. Because sometimes you have flavors of the month, issues of gender equality is at the forefront of what we do and what we say globally, and then something else comes up and we throw that. So this is about human lives. And for me, I'm very passionate about issues of girls' education. It is not something that, it's not about politics, it's about human beings. It's about human lives. It's about the progress and development of our continent. And it's about, it's about taking care of what matters for us as mothers and as women and daughters.
All right, thank you, Oley. And I guess we can all just keep our fingers crossed and continue to hope that many of these initiatives, especially the ones being done at the AfDB and across the continent for the government at the policy level, will begin to take root, and we'll begin to see or reap the benefits, as it were, of many of these policies and initiatives that we're seeing across the continent. Thank you so much for your time today, for making the time out to talk to us today. We really do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esther.
That was Oley Dibba-Wadda, Director of Human Capital at the AfDB.